In this video, I'm going to walk you through some of the known effects of the microbiota. So let's do it. So first I'm going to show you a list of different conditions that are linked to dysfunction of the microbiota. So the microbiota is a force for homeostasis in the human body. And when something goes wrong with it, we can lose homeostasis in a lot of different ways, or other things can happen. So here are some things we can associate with the human microbiota. Inflammatory bowel diseases, elevated susceptibility to sexually transmitted infections. You can read through this list. But down at the bottom, we have things even like central nervous system can be affected by the microbiota of the gut, and presumably other body sites as well. And there are even well-established links with things like heart disease, because the microbiota metabolize our food, and they can create, in some cases, bad waste products when we eat the wrong foods. Also, it gets even crazier if we look at research into mice. There's a really elegant set of experiments with a type of mouse that has autism-like symptoms. They can be alleviated by feeding them one specific species of bacteria. So feed the mice those bacteria, those mice stop acting like they have autism. This is not likely to be ever observed in humans, but it's just kind of amazing that one bacterial species can reprogram a mouse's brain, and that bacterial species is in the gut. So there you have it. Okay. So there are two really big effects the microbiota have on us that are really well understood, and there are a lot of other effects that are not as well understood. So the big ones that we know well are these two. The first one is colonization resistance. This is the bacteria on us and in us prevent dangerous bacteria from colonizing. So they just take up space, they take up nutrients, and sometimes they actively fight against other microorganisms that want to grow on us and in us. And this is going on in the skin, the colon, and the vaginal mucus primarily. So that's a real thing. We'll see some data about that. And then the other one is that bacteria in the colon harvest energy from food that we can't digest. And we'll see a little more about that. So that's the one I want to start with. What it looks like is volatile fatty acids. Those are small organic acids that they're named that because they evaporate easily. So there are a lot of different microorganisms that make volatile fatty acids as a byproduct of fermentation when there's no oxygen. And these fatty acids include butyric acid, which smells like vomit, propionic acid, which flavors Swiss cheese, and acetic acid, which is vinegar. These are all common products of bacterial fermentation. So what happens is a person will eat some type of dietary fiber, some indigestible carbohydrate, and it will pass through the stomach and through the small intestine without being digested, without being absorbed. It will make it to the lumen of the large intestine, where there is no oxygen. Why isn't there oxygen? Well, partly because oxygen that would diffuse in from the blood gets consumed by the colonocytes. So the epithelial cells of the colon, one of their jobs is to use up oxygen and make sure there isn't any in the lumen. I just read about this week. It's awesome. So that oxygen-free environment leads to a lot of fermentation and a lot of volatile fatty acid production. And what we find is that those same colonocytes, those same epithelial cells of the colon, what do they want to eat? Do they eat glucose like other cells in our body? Not if they can help it. They would rather eat butyric acid, a volatile fatty acid. They would rather use that as their energy source. They prefer it 15 times more than they prefer glucose. And so that's what they want to use as their primary source of carbon and energy. Also, the volatile fatty acids in addition to being used by colonocytes, they're diffusing into the blood. They are gases, and so we can't stop them from getting into the blood if they are created. So we can assume that our ancestors often had them in their blood. But if we mostly eat processed and like really easily digestible carbohydrates, those don't ever reach the colon. They're easily absorbed in our small intestine. They don't get fermented. They don't become volatile fatty acids. So our body systems that could react to the presence of VFAs don't ever see the VFAs. And our colonocytes, which are expecting butyric acid as a source of nutrition, don't get it. And so it's no wonder we see some dysfunction from the Western diet. And dysfunction in the microbiota has a special name. It's called dysbiosis, and this is an important definition for you to know. So let's look at this definition of dysbiosis. This is a change to the community structure of the resident microbiota that results in loss of a beneficial function normally provided by that microbiota. So it's really two parts. One is there's a change to the microbiota, and this other part is the microbiota loses a beneficial function it was providing. So what is community structure? Well, it's just the pattern of abundance of every species. So it's hard to describe what it is, but I can tell you what a change in it looks like. Community structure changes if one species becomes more or less abundant than it was. If one species appears or disappears, that's a change to the community structure. So that's all the community structure really means. It's how many cells are there of each species. And any change in that leads to dysfunction of the microbiota is called dysbiosis. And so colonization resistance is the easiest one really to point at, because there are two very obvious examples of this. In one of these, C. diff, people originally got C. diff in the 1990s when they took broad-spectrum antibiotics that severely disrupted their gut microbiota. And that was what was required for C. diff to start growing in their guts, because it couldn't grow in a healthy person's gut back then. Now we have highly evolved strains of C. diff that can grow in a healthy person's gut. But back then, it required dysbiosis. And then the vaginal microbiota protects women from certain STIs and decreases the chance of getting HIV or the human papillomavirus. Bacterial vaginosis is a condition where the community structure of the vaginal microbiota is altered, and it doesn't give the same protection against those sexually transmitted infections. So in the next video, we will look into research into the microbiota.